So, a few months ago, I met an old friend who used to play in a D&D campaign I used to run way back at the turn of the millennium. And she mentioned that the voices I used to do were something that stuck with her from those games. Then the gents over at home and the dude contacted me about their Scorch Basin project and asked if I wanted to record some voice lines. The idea is that each faction for their setting will have a QR code linking to the recordings, so we can get an idea of what the people of that faction sound like. This is just one of the cool features of this project, and you can find out more about it in the links in the description. That got me thinking, because I realize that I run most of my games online these days, and I don't go into a lot of depth with the voices anymore. Part of that is because the microphone changes things up a bit, and I need to favor clear delivery over fancy over-the-top voices. Between these two things, I thought it might be fun to make an idiot's guide to doing voices. Hi, it's me. I'm the idiot. What I'll be going over is mostly advice for game masters, but most of it should be also useful for players. Now, I have no voice training at all, and I don't know the first thing about acting. My entire theatrical career was that one time I got press-ganged into an amateur production of Enquiries and the Lion, way back in 2009, where I played the role of dude who feeds people to lion. So before I hit you with my rambling thoughts about the process, I did some research. And by research, I mean I dragged in a friend to help.
I'm karl.agius. I usually give people two main pieces of advice when I'm giving them advice on character voices. The first is try to figure out some way you can change your voice without actually changing the vocal quality of the voice. So curling your lips in or talking with your jaw to the side is gonna definitely change the way that the voice sounds without actually straining your vocal cords and then hurting your voice after you do it for like an hour or 3 or 6. The other thing I'd like to tell people is try to figure out how your character feels about what they're saying in the situation that they're saying it in. So if you're warning somebody not to go somewhere or do something, the same person is going to say it two very different ways if they're warning like a young person that they're mentoring not to go there versus if they're warning some cocky outsider not to do a thing because they're dabbling in forces that they don't fully understand. So like, careful, young one, you don't know what's out there. Versus, careful, young one, you don't know what's out there. See what I mean?
Thank you, Nico. That was solid advice. In particular, I never thought about the emotional context of delivery. It can still happen naturally, but now that I know to think about it, I can work it into my process and have some control over how it happens. Now let's talk about how I plan out voices. Coming up with voices on the fly is difficult, so I prefer to kind of plot out how different people sound beforehand, and I usually do this when I'm creating a significant NPC. The first thing is keep it simple. You could practice creating an entire voice, and it's certainly fun to do, but if you're running a game, remember that you have multiple characters to voice on top of, actually running the game. It's a lot to keep track of, and losing a voice is absolutely a thing. The more complex you make it, the easier it is to forget what to use between sessions. Luckily, 1 or 2 features are usually enough. Think of things that will help communicate what the character is about. You're after a caricature, something that exaggerates things that stand out. And when I say caricature, I don't mean it has to be funny, although it can be. I find the lowest hanging fruit is just to introduce patterns without really changing your voice much. If you want to portray a graph character, you keep their phrases short and use grants and constructions. A more laid-back character would use longer phrases with some fillers, and a more articulated character would use more complex structure. Consider 2 characters wondering what the hell their friend Jim Bob is doing. A dwarf fighter might say, what's Jim Bob doing? An elf bard, on the other hand, might say something like, I wonder what our dear friend Jim Bob is up to over there. Next, changing up the grammar a little and introducing specific words into the speech pattern can help. For example, in Warhammer Fantasy, the dwarves use the word wazok to describe a foolish person. For example, what be that wazok doing? From there, it's relatively simple to change the pitch of your voice deeper or higher depending on the character. What be that wazok doing? You do need to be a bit careful here, especially with deep voices. As Nico mentioned, you can probably carry a Batman voice for a while, but you will have a sore throat the next day. My friend Rich from Renegade Rose has a slightly more technical video about changing voices if you want to delve deeper, and again you can find it linked in the description below. One thing I find incredibly useful here is to physically change my posture. lounging if I want to sound more relaxed, or tensing up a bit if I want to sound a bit rougher. This is one of the reasons I find voices to be a lot easier in person than playing online. I like to stand up a lot when I'm running games in person, and the range of motion is quite limited when you're sitting down. I don't usually use props, but if it helps you, go for it. Now, if you want to add an extra layer on top of that, you could go for a simple accent. It does not need to be a real word accent, although it's good if you can do that. You could make one up by always ending a sentence in a questioning tone. You could also emphasize some letters more than others. Whatever it is, keep it simple and repeatable. An easy way is to drop some letters. Huh? What be that was doing? Instead of, huh? What be that was doing? I like to get familiar with doing a voice at one of these levels and using it as a template for all characters of the same species. So all F sound this way and all dwarf sound that way. In most cases that's enough. After a while players start to pick up on that and it gives them additional information that you don't need to narrate to them. For example, the shopkeeper looks up as you enter the store. Good day to ye. Versus, good morning friends, I trust the day finds you splendidly. What can I do for you today? And that is usually enough to indicate that the first one is a dwarf. Most NPCs, you don't really need to go much further than that, unless they're important to the story or your party. To recap, here's my way of going about character voices. Keep it simple, start with the speech pattern, use in-world words, not sentences, words. Play with your pitch, layer on some accents, and look for patterns that you can use as templates. All these elements can be mixed and matched. In fact, the only one I would not compromise about is keeping it simple. Everything adds to your cognitive load, and if you're not feeling confident, it's better to go with simple voices and have fun, rather than going all the way with your accents and panicking yourself as you juggle a ton of other things. One thing I like to avoid is dialogue between non-player characters, for two reasons. First, switching between voices is tricky, and I'm not that good. Second, it can be boring for the players to just sit down and listen to you talking to yourself. In these situations, I usually just cut to narrating the important information and moving on. Easier for me, better for the players. Still, I strongly recommend at least trying doing voices. I know I find it fun, players like it, and who knows, it might encourage them to join in too. If you have any good tips for voicing characters, let me know in the comments, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye!